Hello, everyone, and welcome to Positive Forward Motion. This is your host, Denise Scattergood. I am so excited that you're listening in today. I recently had the opportunity to speak with Jerry Yudelson. He's one of the country's leading experts on green buildings and climate change. He's the renowned author of 14 books, including his brand new memoir, The Godfather of Green, which officially comes out today, Wednesday, April 22nd, just in time for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. Today, Jerry will be sharing the lessons and expertise that he has learned throughout his life journey, as well as discuss simple things that we can all do in our lives to help our planet, contribute to change, and celebrate Earth Day every day. Welcome, Jerry, and thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your time and expertise. I had the opportunity to read your memoir, The Godfather of Green, and wow, what a great read. Your life is filled with so many examples of positive forward motion, and I really enjoy how you share your personal and professional journey. Each page was like a new adventure and a great reminder for us all to keep up the positive forward motion, no matter how small or uncertain our step may feel like at the time.
Thank you, Denise, and hello, everyone. You know, when you had that introduction, I was reminded of a famous baseball pitcher, one of the first black baseball pitchers in the major leagues in the late 40s, used to say, "Don't look back. Somebody might be gaining on you." So I always move forward. And, I think a lot of it is just having the confidence to follow your intuition, to follow your sense of what's right, and to be willing to listen along the way. So early in my life, I was a engineering student, environmental engineering at Caltech and at Harvard. And I started to get active in environmental affairs around that time. And after Earth Day, I decided I needed to take a break. So I dropped out and went up in the woods and did my Henry David Thoreau thing for a while, but wound up at UC Santa Cruz teaching environmental studies in one of the first programs in the country, and then got involved in solar power when Jerry Brown became governor. And in the last 20 years, have been heavily involved in the global green building movement. So each of these kind of activities builds on each other, but they're all about protecting the environment and trying to come up with alternatives that are useful and economically beneficial, but that also take us in a very positive direction. So in today's world of climate change and climate emergency, the direction's pretty clear. What seems to be lacking is the sense that we need to move rather quickly. And so in the last few years, the last 10 years, really, I've been really focused on climate change issues and trying to do what I could to bring those to people's attention. So that's kind of a short resume. I've written lots of books, and the memoir, which is due out, as you said, for Earth Day, was an attempt to sort of put the spiritual side of my life cheek by jowl with the environmental activist side and show people how these are not mutually exclusive, but in fact reinforce each other.
Wow, I could not agree more. I have a saying that how we do anything is how we do everything. And for me, I've always needed to get outside to get connected and feel great inside. I mean, Mother Nature has a magical way of grounding me. And with this global crisis, I believe we've all been woken up, and I hope we stay awake. And Jerry, would you please elaborate on this for us?
Well, one of the things that I've found is by having a spiritual path, by practicing meditation and mindfulness, you give yourself freedom to explore, and you give yourself energy to explore, and you give yourself a positive outlook to bring to other people. So I think that going within, as you described, is essential to being effective on the outside, because you're not going to move people if you yourself are not moved. You're not going to inform people if you yourself are not informed. So to me, this is really the work of each person's lifetime in their own way to do this. In the book, I actually wrote an epilogue, and I was thinking when I wrote this memoir, how would I talk to a teenager today? How would I talk to a young climate striker? What could I say that wouldn't just sound like, well, that's what my parents say? What would I say that could move them? And I think what I came up with is this whole notion that you have to prepare for this to be a lifelong journey because, in fact, climate change is already baked into the pie. It's already there. We're going to have warmer oceans for the next 300 years unless we somehow magically figure out how to take all that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So, knowing that you're going to have to live with the consequences of what we've done in the past without getting defeated by it, without feeling overstressed, you need to have that sense of inner renewal to take into your outer work. And you might just be a parent who is wanting to have their children grow up appreciating nature. And to me, that's great work. It's great work to feel kinship with nature, to feel kinship with other people, because so much of our lives we feel separate. So there's a place for everyone. Not everyone is going to be an activist. Not everyone's going to lie down in front of a bulldozer building a pipeline. Maybe that's 5% of the people, but the rest of the people, the rest of us, are going to have to support them. And so my message in the book was to today's teenagers and climate strikers was your elders have your back, that you've got to do this work, but we will support you. And I think that's the most important message that older people can give to younger people is, you know, hey, this is a big problem. Yes, we contributed to it, but you know what? You're going to have to fix it. That's just the way things are because for the most part, people didn't know. And that I think is, you can't excuse ignorance, but the fact of the matter is most people weren't listening. I mean, 30 years ago, the scientists began to tell us about climate change. We didn't want to listen. 20 years ago, Al Gore, after he lost the presidential race, came out with his book and his famous slideshow, An Inconvenient Truth. We didn't want to listen. Now we're listening. So, okay, maybe it takes 30 years. Maybe it takes a generation to get society to be willing to change ingrained habits. But here we are today, and it's important that everybody start listening and figuring out what they can do.
Yes, and we can all do our part to be more aware and to also take the time to teach our children. I mean, for example, I have a garden and an orange tree, and I've been teaching my grandson to say thank you each time he picks from the garden. And he's now 3 years old, and just the other day when he picked an orange off of the tree, he stopped, turned around, and said thank you. I mean, it really filled my heart with joy to see him become more aware and to be thankful and show gratitude for the gift that the tree is giving us. And this is important to do every day, not just on Earth Day, but today is a very special day. Today is Earth Day, and the very first one was back in 1970. Is that correct?
That's correct. And if I tell you I was a college organizer then, you can do the math. It's a long time ago. It was a seminal event in many ways. It was 20 million people by some estimates, which was 10% of the US population at the time, and 2,000 campuses and 7 or 8,000 elementary and secondary schools had events. And the real importance of Earth Day was twofold, really. One is it was a teach-in. It was a sense of coming to terms with the pollution that was rampant. And certainly in Los Angeles, where I grew up, it was rampant. It was 1 day out of every 2 was a stage 1 unhealthy air alert. So it was a teaching, but it also was a political event. And I think what most people maybe don't quite realize until they do a little homework is that just about every environmental law that we have today that's preventing air pollution, water pollution, controlling toxic waste, protecting endangered species, all of those things came out of Earth Day within the 5-year period, which In political terms, it's like 3 Congresses. Within 5 years, all of these laws were put into place that we today enjoy the fruits of. So sometimes it's easy to say, well, that was a one-day event 50 years ago, but it has ramifications even today.
Absolutely. And when I was reading, I love that. I remember you stating in the book that, yeah, Earth Day came and went with not an immediate change right away, but it really did start something. And I think that's really good for the listeners and all of us to remember that if you don't see the fruits of your labor immediately, if you have that passion and belief to keep moving forward. And as I was reading your book, I was getting so inspired and excited over and over and over again about life and moving forward and doing what is right and doing it from a place of love. And as we talk about saving the little animals and all of that, could you elaborate? There was a part in the story that I just loved, and it was protecting the marshes, and it was the story of the little mouse that turned the tide.
That's a very that's a very funny story. I was a young guy then, and after Earth Day in California in 1972, there was this ruling by the California Supreme Court that our California Environmental Quality Act, which was actually signed by Governor Ronald Reagan at the time, required not just public projects to look at their environmental impacts, but any project that had to be approved by a public agency. In other words, all private projects of any size. And so I was hired to start writing environmental impact reports. And at one point, we came across a project. We were given the assignment by Marin County in Northern California to look at a project that was a medical office building, pretty simple idea, but it was going to be built on a marsh, a salt marsh that was right next to San Francisco Bay. And okay, that's something you do your work and it's you write your report and so forth. But as we started to look into it, one of our biologists went out into the field and found the evidence of the so-called red-bellied salt marsh harvest mouse, which is a big mouthful, but effectively it was a little mouse that lived in the salt marshes and actually ate pickle grass and salty plants that most other animals wouldn't eat. And it was actually on the endangered species list. So all of a sudden, this is a big red flag. And to make a long story short, the mouse led to this brouhaha over this simple project, decided not to put it in the marsh. In fact, the developers abandoned the project because it was obvious that this was going to be opposed by a lot of people once they found out that they had an endangered species in that marsh. And I had been doing work before that to learn about salt marshes. And one of the things that I learned is that they're the most productive ecosystems on the planet because it's where fresh water, salt water come together. And it's a place of great productivity. So they're very worth protecting. And at that time in San Francisco Bay, a lot of them were being filled in for development. So after the project was abandoned and a few years later, it became a public park and it's still protected today. So the good news is, you do your work and occasionally you get an opportunity to do something that has a long lasting effect and is positive for the environment. And I think everybody should be looking for opportunities, no matter what work you do, to find those opportunities that you can have an impact on preserving something valuable or restoring a valuable environment. Because I think a lot of what we're going to be into the next few generations is restoring a lot of places that have been damaged by industrial development. So plenty of good work to do, and we're going to reforest a good part of the planet because forests are essential for storing carbon dioxide, at least growing forests are. So this is something where everybody can do their part, whether it's just planting that one orange tree that your grandson will enjoy, because tree planting is an act of love, because for the most part, you'll never get to enjoy a mature apple tree or a mature tree of any kind because it'll take a few decades to grow, but you still have to plant anyway.
Well said. With right now, the global crisis and the whole COVID and this pandemic, I've heard many people, share with me who maybe didn't take as much notice to the environment as they did before, saying, wow, the sky seems clearer. I looked up at night and the stars seem more vibrant, or I can see further, and noticing, what's going on in the world with everybody kind of coming to a stop. And again, waking up a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a very interesting question because what's going to happen as soon as the all clear whistle blows and we start going back to the way we were, those clear skies are going to vanish. And we're going to have to ask ourselves, well, is it really necessary to have a vibrant, healthy, economically abundant society? Is it really necessary to pollute the planet? And the answer really is no. We've just been really sloppy about how we've approached things, and we've let, in a way, the private marketplace dictate too much of what we should be doing. So, for example, one of the things that we're going to learn is if we move to all electric vehicles, all of a sudden a good part of the air pollution that's from exhaust fumes is going to disappear. But we're also going to learn it's going to become healthier. And one of the things that we're figuring out now, that I've been reading about, is the reduction in air pollution is actually responsible for a reduction in the deaths from the virus because air pollution has a damaging effect on your health. And it's much more concentrated where poor people live, people of color live, and they're the ones that are suffering the most. So all of a sudden, the sense of environmental justice is going to come back into our politics. And it really is going to change things because fundamentally, if you live in Los Angeles, you do everything you can if you've got money to live on the west side because pollution goes from west to east because of the prevailing winds. Well, somebody is breathing all that, right? And it's that somebody is the one that doesn't have the money to live on the west side. So all of a sudden, a sense of fairness and equity is going to come back in as well. And I think that will fundamentally change the whole discussion and lead to much more efforts towards pollution control, towards subsidizing electric vehicles, and even electric bicycles are going to have a big renaissance because bicycles are an easy way to get around. You don't have to park them in a whole big parking space. And people are starting to discover, wow, I don't need a car if I'm going less than 3 miles, 5 miles. And most of our trips are less than 3 miles or 5 miles, right? Go to the grocery store, whatever. So, what we have to guard against is that we're going to forget about the climate change issue because we're so economically strapped by the downturn from the virus. And I think that is something that I wrote about, in fact, just yesterday in an editorial in the San Diego Union Tribune, is we have to take lessons learned from this virus and our response to it and apply them to climate change, which in a way is a permanent pandemic. And that may be scary to think about, but the fact of the matter is it's a tidal wave that's coming in our direction, and we've got to move to higher ground.
Yes, a tidal wave is headed straight for us. And you're right, Jerry. Now is the time for us to take action. And I know many of us are impatient and excited to start focusing on getting our economy back on track. And we also need to put that same passion, energy, and focus into caring for our planet because it really is all of our responsibility and it all matters. And a great way for us to get there is through love, which you mention more than once in your book. And I wrote down this quote from your book: love is the only story worth telling. Would you please elaborate on that for us?
When I was writing the book, I was bringing my spiritual experiences together with my environmental work. Anytime you study any spiritual path, ultimately it's about love. It's about the feeling of oneness that we all experience with love, whether it's love for children, love for a spouse or significant other, love for the earth. It's that feeling that goes beyond our limited sense of self. And when I wrote this letter to a young climate striker, I also was thinking about that. And I said, the most effective political movements of the 20th century, Gandhi in India, Martin Luther King Jr. in the US, Nelson Mandela in South Africa, were all based around love. They weren't based around hate. They weren't based around revenge. They were based around, okay, there is somebody who's doing things that are not right, but let's bring them along with us. And I think when we talk about climate change, it's too easy to have enemies. And yeah, there are people that are doing bad things, but you know what? They also got to breathe. They also got to eat. How can we bring other people along with us so that there is a feeling that what we're doing is not always in opposition to something, but it's on a path forward towards a greater love and greater abundance? And of course, I also wrote about how I loved competition, whether I was playing basketball or in business. And, one of the things about competition is it certainly brings out your strength, but it also has this effect of, well, I won and you lost. And so the game that we're all really playing is the game of life. And in that game, everybody can win. And they can win through having the experience of love and a high experience of love for God, love for the planet, has to be part of anyone's real life. And to the degree that we don't experience it, we feel diminished. And to the degree that we do experience it, we feel enriched. And so I think ultimately this work of environmentalism and the work of inner discovery is the same work. It's to get that feeling of abundance back, that feeling of enrichment that comes not from just having things or doing things, but from being a full human being. And that, I think, is the path that everyone is walking, whether they realize it or not.
I could not agree more. And it is a great reminder for all of us. I mean, the feeling of connection, love, and abundance. And in your book, Jerry, you talk about rather than being angry and mad against things, that you shift your emotions to that of positive love.
It's a struggle for everyone because anger is so easy. It's one of those negative emotions, but it's so easy to have because it comes out of frustrated desire. It's like that's what the Buddhists teach. And we have to get beyond that. And I think everything in our media and so forth is designed to fuel that sense of agitation and unrest and anger. And we have to get beyond it. And maybe part of the lockdown that's going on today and that people are feeling frustrated by, so to speak, is a great opportunity to explore getting beyond anger, getting beyond those things that are holding you back from this realization of the peacefulness of the inner self, the love that you naturally feel, and the reverence that you feel for the earth. Go and explore those things, even if it's just in a backyard garden. And I think that sense will stay with you because there's no point in getting mad at a virus. The virus doesn't even care, actually. It only has one job, which is to replicate itself. So, how can you get mad at that? It's just what it was designed to do. But why get mad at our leaders for being slow in responding? It's like none of us wanted to respond in the way that we've responded with 10 or 20 or 30 million people out of work and people losing their homes and businesses. Nobody wanted that. So I think it's time to put those negative emotions aside and begin to explore the positive emotions that will, in fact, stay with us long after the current crisis has passed.
Absolutely. And for the listeners, I'm sure they're picking up your energy and your calmness, and you can just feel your connection and spirituality. And in your book, you shared again and again, which I loved reading, and I know the listeners are just going to be so excited to read it. It's going to be one of my favorites. It's going to be highlighted all over the book. How you shared how you swayed away from the spiritual, right? Because we're humans, it's what we do, and you reconnected again and again. Is there a moment, or one moment, or two that was perhaps one of your biggest ahas that you really were like, okay, this is what I recognize when I get uncomfortable, and I'm going to get right back on track quicker?
It's part of everyone's path is to have an awareness of what's going on. And I like to say it's the difference between responding and reacting. If you're always reacting, somebody says something and you get mad, and then you say something and they say something. If you're always reacting, no. Somebody gets mad, you can respond, but how you respond can change over time. You can respond with compassion, you can respond with calmness, you can respond with simply, is that right? Asking something. You don't have to get mad at somebody because they said something. And, we have all these difficulties today, and we have to be compassionate with each other. So for me, the sort of spiritual way of life is always about coming back to awareness, recognizing when you're disconnected and getting reconnected. That's the whole path until you're really connected just about all of the time, and then all of the time. So for me, it's always been a process of, let's say, going on retreat. Even if the retreat is just a half-hour meditation where you get rid of everything on the outside, you focus within. And so it's hard to pinpoint, beyond the initial dramatic awakening that I profile in the book, any one thing. It's more of a process because it's about attenuating our old unworkable tendencies, attenuating those, and building new habits, if you will, that will stand us in better stead over the years. And so for me, it was always a matter of struggling between this way I had been and the way I wanted to be. And I think the essence of any path is to make the pendulum swing a little more in one direction than another until it stops swinging totally. But that's something we all need to do because so much of the influences around us pushes towards, lust, anger, and greed, those three enemies that keep us away from a deeper sense of enrichment and of satisfaction and of well-being. And so to me, that's the voyage into the heart. And so that's why I say love is the only practice worth having and the only journey worth taking, because once you go there, you start to open yourself up to more elevated inner experiences, and your life changes and the life of everybody around you changes.
Oh, it sure does. And it's also such a good reminder for us all to be patient and compassionate, not only with each other, but also with ourselves. Throughout your book, you share many times where you've made significant changes. You've overcome challenges in your life. And looking back now, it's easy to see how this all worked for the greater good and had a greater purpose, which is a really good reminder for us all. And I especially love the quote that you use by the Dalai Lama: when you lose, don't lose the lesson.
That is a wonderful quote because life is full of lessons, and you're never going to get 100% of what you want. And so take those lemons and make lemonade, as they say. But more than that, make lemonade for other people too. And it's never just about you, it's always about the people around you. It's about teaching gratitude to your grandson, And a lot of people have gratitude journals as a practice, right? You write down everything you're thankful for, and it does change your mood. It does change your mindset. It starts to lessen the drama of those things that aren't going so well and starts to put you in a mood of thankfulness. And that thankfulness is a core thing that opens you up to compassion for others who may not yet have realized what you have. And then you can dance. And one of the things that I said about competition is you realize in the end, there's no other. There's just different versions of yourself. And the only thing left to do is to dance. And sometimes we lose track of that. But other times, it's like Ram Dass said, everyone you see is just God in drag. And so why not, when you go to the grocery store, just think, wow, what a costume party. All of these people are here, and I'm here too. And we're just dancing this dance of shopping for groceries and checking out and having conversations. It's just a dance, it's just a play of your own inner awareness that you can take anywhere. And all of a sudden, the most mundane things seem delightful. In fact, the other day, somebody asked me about, or somebody made a comment about, how do you stay elevated when there are so many mundane things you have to do? And I thought to myself, I said, you know what? Mundane is just another word for being out of touch with yourself. If you think it's mundane to eat dinner, then you haven't seen the sparkle of energy in the food, in your own act of eating, in what happens after you eat, and things turn into energy in your body. There's nothing mundane except our awareness. And all of a sudden, with that viewpoint, you're dancing through life, because ultimately you have to dance off the stage. But while you're there, why not have fun?
Oh, absolutely. And again, I believe we've all been woken up a bit to understand and pay attention to the littlest things that, people have gone through life taking advantage. I'm so excited to walk through my neighborhood and everyone say hello because I say hello to everyone. For me, it feels funny to walk by another human and not say hello. I feel like I'm somehow being rude. And my friends would always laugh and go, "Gosh, you're just relentless." And it never bothered me if someone said hello back or not, because I don't know what's happening in their world or their life. But if I can say hello and smile and make someone's day, and I want to back up a little. You shared it's not always about getting 100% of what we want, but we're not always going to get 100% of what we want. But quite often, we do get 100% of what we need, and we don't realize maybe at that moment it is what we need or that lesson that we're learning, and to embrace it in that moment. What am I learning from this, and how can I approach it with love is definitely a big takeaway that I'm taking away from your book. And it's really reconnected me. The environment and our earth has always been very important. But I will agree, going through my life and traveling and working and building a business and a home and all of these things, that there's more things that I can do, and understanding the little things that I do here and there will add up in a big way. If the listeners are out there thinking, "Gosh, Jerry, give me some ideas. What could I do? I'm just simple me." What is maybe one positive forward motion message you want to leave with the listeners that they could think about or walk away with today going, okay, I can do that?
I think the essential lesson of Earth Day is figure out a way to do more with less, whether it's eating lower on the food chain. I mean, I've been basically close to a vegan my whole adult life. That isn't for everybody, but it's something to think about. Can I, as you said, drive less and bike more? Well, not everybody has the physical capacity to do that. Can I say thank you to somebody today, or hello, as you suggested? Each day, each moment is an opportunity to do something that gives back. Can I take this little bowl that I have and grow a few pieces of lettuce in it? I planted a bunch of lettuce the other day, and I'm amazed because I usually buy lettuce starts. It's easier, and you see what you're getting. But I planted some lettuce seed, and I'm like, wow, these are really small seeds. And it was like kind of a revelation to just realize that that tiny seed can feed multitudes. And so we sometimes just need to take an action that connects us with the earth. I like to hand weed. I'm always walking through the neighborhood where I live plucking weeds. And a weed is not harmful. It's just a plant growing where you don't want it to grow, right? But I pluck weeds. I've always hand weeded. I don't like to spray anything. So this is kind of rambling and silly, but there's always something you can do to change how you see the world, how other people see the world. Recycle something that maybe you wouldn't have recycled before. I recycle, toilet paper rolls, not the toilet paper, but the cardboard that it comes in. Or no, with toilet paper, you have to use both sides, as they say.
I'm sure we can all find creative ways to do more with less in all areas of our lives. I encourage the listeners, to submit their ideas. An idea my grandfather instilled in me that I still use to this day is I reuse the sleeve from the bread bag. My grandfather, he was from the Ukraine. He lived through the Great Depression, and he would tell us how silly it was to toss a perfectly good plastic bag, the bread sleeve in the trash, just to go to the store and buy more plastic. And every weekend when he would take my brother and I fishing, our sandwiches were kept clean and dry in the bread sleeve bag. And to this day, whether I'm going to the beach or camping or out to the park, I still do the same thing. And it makes so much sense. We just need to pause, keep our mind open, and I'm sure we can find lots of ways to do more with less. And it's all going to add up in such a positive way.
The generation of people that grew up during the Depression were very thrifty. And in fact, the first back to the land movement in the US in modern times came about during the Depression when people realized then with the World War II that they had victory gardens, that they had to take responsibility for their food supply at a very local level. And today we have farmers markets and other things that are like that. And where I live, there's farms that will deliver fresh vegetables to you once a week directly from the farm. And I think this crisis that we're going through now, even with 3 months or 6 months of unemployment and people falling behind on their mortgages and their rent payments, is going to change people's outlook about saving for the future, about saving things, as you said, as simple as bread bags, because why pay for something that you've already paid for once, right? It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but I do think there's a consciousness of I'd better be prepared myself for the future because the government's not going to be able to save every person's income and every person's savings. It is going to be like that again. That was 90 years ago, 80 years ago. These things recur in cycles. Even the Bible talks about 7 fat years and 7 lean years. And we've kind of been able to put that cycle off to the side, at least in our country and in most of the Western countries. But there is a cycle here that tells us we need to be prepared. We need to take personal responsibility. And I think this crisis is going to once again reinforce that because, hey, we've had this fantastic decade after the last crisis and unemployment at record lows and people's paper wealth at record highs. But all of a sudden, in just 3 months, that's now being called into question. So I do think there's going to be an Earth Day change of what they call the zeitgeist, the awareness of the time, is going to come into play here as well.
Mm-hmm. And a quote that I circled and wrote that I read in your book was, a trick in life is not to get too high in praise and too upset with blame, which what you're sharing right now and for us all to remember is, yes, when things are going great and they're going good, to be thankful and have gratitude, appreciation, because when we do, and then things when they're not going as well as maybe they were and that cycle changes, we won't be dropped to our knees so quickly.
And I think the word for that is resilience. And one of the things that we're going to discover when this crisis is over is how resilient we are as people, as communities, as a larger society, as an economy. because climate change is going to challenge our resilience more than anything as we start to have to deal, as Australia did quite recently, with mammoth fires. 30% of the cause is drought, which is climate change induced. So we're going to have to discover for ourselves, how resilient are we really? And the first resilience comes from inside, when you can respond to adverse events without losing your center. And I think that is the essence of what I'm trying to write about in the book, is you have to do some work, some inner work, to get to that place. You can't just wish it into existence. It takes a lot of work to change ingrained habits and patterns of thinking. And, thinking comes before doing. So if things are not doing the way you think they should be, then maybe the thinking is not right either. And maybe behind the thinking is your sense of connectedness with yourself and with life around you. So each of these crises gives us an opportunity for reflection and tests our resilience. And, we're resilient people. Human beings have always been resilient, but this is a big test.
Yes, it is. And I'm so excited so your book, The Godfather of Green, which is super exciting. It's released actually today, April 22nd. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you if you would, when the book does come out, for the listeners, I like to have sometimes a contest or something fun to be able to give away a couple signed copies. So would you be willing to do that for us?
Absolutely. So I'll give you 2 signed copies. And I'll write a nice little message for whoever you decide is the appropriate recipient. And the Godfather of Green, an Eco-Spiritual Memoir. People can also go to my website, jerryudelson.net, and learn more about the book.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I want to thank you so much for being so gracious with your time, and more so gracious with taking the time to share your story. The Godfather of Green is a wonderful book. I know it's going to be one of my favorites that I read over and over and over again. So I feel so honored that I got a glimpse into it before the listeners have an opportunity, but it's wonderful. And again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Denise, for all that you do and for being so appreciative. Every writer loves an appreciative reader. So I'm sending you love for being an appreciative reader and for all that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening in today. And thank you, Jerry, for sharing your wisdom and love for our planet. I encourage you all to read Jerry's brand new book, The Godfather of Green, an Eco-Spiritual Memoir, now available everywhere. Jerry was kind enough to offer 2 signed copies of his book, and you can enter to win by going to denisescattergood.com/blog and click on the latest blog, and there you will find directions on how to enter. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Denise Scattergood, and there you'll have updates on the giveaway and also how you can enter. You'll also be able to stay in the loop for all things positive forward motion. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at Alert Trainers. And if you'd like a daily dose of positivity sent straight to your phone, you can text the word positive to 313131, and you'll opt in for my positive text messages. As always, I'm wishing you success, happiness, and health, both personally and professionally. And remember, no matter how small your step, as long as you're taking it in the right direction, that's what I call positive forward motion.